Good morning. I'm good. Come right up here, and if you could just stand behind the chair to start with. Right.
Absolutely.
And raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now, before we begin, well, you anticipated my first request, which is to keep your mask off. It just that it'll be easier to hear you. If you feel a need that you got to put it back on, feel free. But
Thank you.
the important thing is that we be able to hear you, and so what we're going to do is start to make sure we can hear you. We're going to have you state your full name, spell each of your names.
Okay. My name is Courtney, Courteney, Batya, Batya, Ross, Ross.
Thank you. Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Ross, can you just tell the jurors, not your address, but generally where you live?
Yes, I live in Northeast Minneapolis.
How long have you been in the Northeast Minneapolis area?
My entire life. I was born and raised.
And can you tell the jurors how old you are?
I'm 45 years old.
Seems like a strange question. There is a reason for it.
It's okay.
So. And do you have any children?
I have 2 boys.
Okay. And Ms. Ross, did you know George Floyd?
Yes.
When did you meet George Floyd?
I met Floyd in August of 2017.
And you refer to him as Floyd?
All the time.
That's how you just refer to him all the time?
Yes.
And in court we prefer to use Mr. Floyd. So as much as you can, do that, but I understand Floyd is just how you knew him, right?
Sure.
All right. And so when was it that you first met Mr. Floyd?
May I tell the story?
Sure.
Okay. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. Excuse me.
And Ms. Ross, just so you know, if you feel like you need to just take a moment to collect yourself, feel free. We're in no rush here.
Thank
right?
you.
Yep.
In August of 2017, I had gotten off work one night. I worked at a coffee shop for 22 years now, part-time, and I was tired and I just cleaned up and closed up the shop, and I went to go visit my son's father, who was staying at Harbor Lights, the Salvation Army shelter. He had some difficulties and was staying there. I entered Harbor Lights, and when you visit there, you have to ask for a person to come down if you're visiting them. And so I had the receptionist call him down, but he didn't seem to be coming down, so I waited in the lobby, and I wanted to talk to him about our son's birthday. Excuse me. I was pretty upset, and I started kind of fussing in the corner of the lobby. And at one point, Floyd came up to me. And Floyd has this great, deep Southern voice, raspy. He's like, sis, you okay, sis? And I wasn't okay. I said, no, I'm just waiting for my son's father. He said, well, can I pray with you? I thought I was so tired. We had been through so much, my sons and I. And this kind person just to come up to me and say, can I pray with you? When I felt alone in this lobby. It was so sweet. And at the time, I had lost a lot of faith in God.
Ms. Ross, sorry to interrupt, but I'm just going to want to maybe help with a few questions, okay?
Sure.
At that point, did you know what Mr. Floyd was doing there at the Salvation Army?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. He worked there as a security guard.
Okay. And so he came up to you and tried to comfort you?
Yes.
Okay. And was that the beginning of your relationship?
Well, not that part. That was just Floyd. Afterwards, he had asked me who my son's father was, and I said, you know, we're co-parent and we're not in a relationship. And that's when I like to say his voice dropped like 2 levels, even though it was deep already. And he asked me if he could get my number, and we had our first kiss in the lobby. And that's when our relationship started.
And after that, how close did you become?
We were very close.
And so I'm not sure you told us when this was. Do you recall roughly, not the date, but the year at least?
In August of 2017.
Okay. And up until his death, did you continue to be in a relationship with him?
Yes.
Can you describe, how close how often you saw each other during those 3 years?
Just about every day we saw each other, as much as we possibly could.
Were there times when you weren't as close as other times?
We had, sometimes just like all couples, we argued sometimes and, might have taken a break, but.
Like most couples.
Like most couples, I assume.
Did you learn, whether he was new to Minneapolis?
Oh yeah, on our first date, like most people do, we went over like our histories, and he told me he was from Houston.
And what kinds of things did the two of you do together when you get together and do things?
Floyd was new to the city, so everything was kind of new to him. Everywhere we went was new to him. He made it seem like, I was new to my own city. So we like to go to, he lived right by Lake Bade-Makaska. We like to go down there a lot and, enjoy the outdoors. We like to go to the sculpture garden and just, walk around. We went out to eat a lot.
Why?
Because Floyd loved to eat a lot. He's a big man, and it took a lot of energy to keep him going. And he loved food, and so did I. It was fun. It was an adventure always with him.
Did you know where he was working? Prior to his death, had he been working someplace?
Yes, he was working at Conga.
What is
Latin Bistro?
Okay. What is that?
Conga is a restaurant, but also a nightclub in the evening.
What did he do there?
He was a security guard. He was head of security there.
And did he at some point lose that job?
Only because of COVID. I mean, it shut down because of COVID.
And you had met at Salvation Army. Did you, learn eventually that he worked there?
Yes, I knew that evening that he worked at the Salvation Army.
And he was a security guard there?
Yes.
And at some point that job ended, correct?
Yes. I think that maybe a year or so after I met him.
And, in the time period leading up to his death in May of last year, let's talk about January to May when he passed. How often were the two of you seeing each other?
Of 2020?
Yes.
At the beginning of the year, we had not seen each other, kind of separated for a little while, but from March until May, we spent every day together.
And we have a photograph of Mr. Floyd. I believe we showed that to you in a prior meeting with you, correct?
Yes.
And you recognize that as him?
Yes.
All right. And you're going to read offer exhibit 247?
247 is received.
Look that up. So I'm showing you exhibit 247.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. See, if you touch the screen, it's going to write on there, so sorry. You familiar with this photograph?
Yes.
What kind of photograph is this?
I would call it a dad selfie.
And why would you call it that?
I'm just joking, but a lot of dads sometimes don't have the best angle when they take selfies. It's kind of lower and I don't know, don't take the time to maybe do the certain angles that everybody else does.
And so this is you believe, a selfie that he took?
Yes.
All right.
I believe it was outside of the Salvation Army.
Do you recall about roughly when this was taken?
From the sweater he was wearing, I think it was the fall of 2017.
Did Mr. Floyd have any children?
Yes.
How many children did he have?
2 girls.
And did he try to be a part of their lives as much as he could?
Yes, he loved his girls. It was hard being in Minnesota, long distance, but.
So his daughters were not in Minnesota? Is that no?
No.
I want to make sure that your voice is loud enough for everybody to hear. At some point, when you knew Mr. Floyd, did you learn of his mother's death?
Yes.
Do you recall when that was?
It was in May of 2018.
And did you see, describe, if you would, for the jury, what you saw his reaction to his mother's death?
Pardon me. Floyd is Floyd's what I would call a mama's boy. I could tell from the minute I met him. And when he came back from Houston, he seemed kind of like a shell of himself. Like he was broken. He seemed so sad. He didn't have the same kind of bounce that he had. He was devastated. He loved his mom so much, and I knew that. He talked about her all the time. I knew how he felt. It's so hard to lose a parent that you love like that.
Ms. Ross, thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll see if I can ask some questions to help a little, okay? So he struggled with grief over his mother's death?
Excuse me, yes.
And going to change topics a bit, okay?
Okay,
You need a minute? Are you okay?
I'm okay. I can do it.
You met Mr. Floyd at Salvation Army
Yes,
and then proceeded to maintain a relationship with him.
yes,
And I have to ask you if drug use was a part of that relationship.
yes.
And what kind of drug use was a part of that relationship?
Floyd and I both suffered with an opioid addiction.
And do you know how, like for your own self,
Yeah.
how you came to be involved, with what kind of drugs and how you became
The use of
involved?
opioids, yes. Both Floyd and I, our story, it's a classic story of how many people get addicted to opioids. We both suffered from chronic pain. Mine was in my neck and his was in his back. We both had prescriptions, but after prescriptions that were filled and we got addicted and tried really hard to break that addiction many times.
And were you each aware of each other's struggles with opioids?
Yes, eventually in our relationship we shared that.
And did you work together on that issue?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And over how long of a period did this struggle go on for you, for both of you?
Addiction, in my opinion, is a lifelong struggle. So it's something that we dealt with every day. It's not something that just kind of comes and goes. It's something I'll deal with forever.
And were there periods of time when you were not using opioids?
Absolutely.
And same question with regard to Mr. Floyd.
Yes, absolutely.
And were there times when you knew that he was using opioids more than by prescription?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And when you weren't using, prescription opioids, where did you get them?
Off the street. On the black market.
And you knew that he was doing that as well.
Yes.
And turning your attention to, well, let me ask this. You were in a relationship for nearly 3 years.
Yes.
And did this use of opioids beyond even prescriptions sort of continue throughout that 3-year period for Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
And it's something that you saw yourself and were aware of.
Yes.
And I have to ask the same question of you. Did you struggle using during that entire period?
Yes.
And were there times when you would use together?
Yes.
And for what you saw Mr. Floyd using, what form of opioids did he typically use?
Oxycontin or oxycodone. and any kind of oxy.
And how did he get that? How did he use it?
Swallow them?
And so in pill form?
Yes. Sorry.
That's right. Not the easiest question to ask, for you. So I'm sorry.
It's okay.
If you ever don't understand my question, feel free to ask
Okay.
or let me know. Okay. And so there were times when you would obtain non-prescription opiate pills together.
Yes, there would be other people's prescriptions.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
They would be other people's prescriptions.
And were there some times, well, why would you get them through other people's prescriptions? What do you mean?
To make sure they were safe.
And were there times then that you had to get pills other than, from what you knew were somebody else's prescriptions?
Yes.
And were there times when you thought that maybe Mr. Floyd wasn't using, or was using, but not with you, not in your presence?
Yes. There was a time.
And were there times when you were using together, well, I guess that's a poorly worded question already. Let me just ask it this way. Did you use the same amounts when you used?
Yes.
And taking your attention to March of 2020, and there was a time in March when you knew he was back to using pills, is that right?
I thought his behavior had changed.
Okay. And what do you mean by that?
I think when you know someone who suffers with any type of addiction, you can start to kind of see changes when they're using again. And there's just slight behavioral changes that I noticed in him, and it just made me suspect.
And in March of 2020, did you also kind of fall back into using
Yes,
some?
I did.
So you, and were you two using together back in March, or you just suspected his use?
In March, yes, we did use together.
And was there a period then after March where you thought the two of you had both been able to quit for a while?
Yes, a long period.
And then kind of going forward to May of 2020, was there a time when you thought he might be using again?
Yes.
And so in May, when you thought that, what led you to think that?
It was the same type of thing, just behavior changes in Floyd.
And did you also kind of fall back to using opioids in May of 2020?
One time, yes.
And he was aware of that?
Yes.
And when he let me ask you this, I guess. In May of 2020, did you know where he was living? Just the general area.
Yes. Yes.
Did he have his own place where he stayed?
Yes. He lived in a place in St. Louis Park,
Did he have,
side by side.
did he have roommates there?
Yes, 2.
Did the two of you ever live together?
No, we stayed at each other's places, but we didn't live together.
So in May of 2020, do you recall the last time you spoke with him?
Yes.
Do you recall when that was in relation to his death?
It was the day before he died.
And how did you talk to him? Like by
By
phone?
phone.
Okay. And did you know what he was going to be doing that night, or where he was going to be staying?
That night I knew he said he was going to be staying at Sylvia's
Did you know who Sylvia was?
Yes, she's a friend of ours.
And so as far as you knew, he was going to be staying at a friend's house, Sylvia.
Yes.
And do you recall him saying what the plan was for why they were going to Sylvia's?
Well, Floyd had, made his Minneapolis family here too, and a lot of the people that he was friends with were from other states, and almost everybody had lost their job within that time, and he was feeling kind of lonely and just wanted to hang out with his friends. And so a lot of people that worked at the Salvation Army with him and other people that just stayed there, and they were, just kind of being a family.
And was Sylvia, did she work at the Salvation Army too?
Yes.
So he knew her from there?
Yes.
So that was the last time you talked to him, is the Sunday before his death?
Yes.
You told the jurors earlier that sort of the classic story leading to an opioid addiction, having injuries and prescriptions.
Yes.
Had Mr. Floyd been an active person physically?
Yes. He was very active.
Okay. And what do you mean by that? What types of things did you see him doing?
Well, Floyd liked to work out every day. He lifted weights that are far beyond anything I could lift every single day. He did sit-ups, push-ups, pull-ups, just within his house. If he went out and about, he would go running, biking. He always played sports. He loved playing sports with like neighborhood kids or anybody really that would pick up any type of ball or racket. He would play instantly. So he was always involved in that. He would do anything physical. We went on paddle boating. We'll take walks. But he was the type of person which is to run to the store.
When you were with him, whether either he had been exercising or just hanging out, did you ever complain of shortness of breath or having difficulty breathing?
No.
And did he have did he have sports injuries that he complained of?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier, his neck?
His neck, and it down like from his neck to shoulder blade and down to his lower back. There was 3 main kind of areas.
And despite that, he remained physically active. He would do these activities.
Oh, yes.
And when he did those things, it led to his prescriptions, those injuries that led to his prescriptions for opiates.
The
injuries that he had to his neck.
Oh, yes.
And I think I forgot to ask you, was there a time in 2020 when the two of you took a test for COVID?
Yes.
And did you learn the results? Did he tell you the results of his COVID test?
Yes.
What did he
His were positive, mine were negative.
And do you recall when that was?
I believe it was late March.
And so because of that, did he quarantine for a while?
Yes, he was already quarantining, but his roommates also had COVID.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. That's the only questions I have, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Ross.
Good morning, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to hear about your struggles with opioid addiction.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with the jury. I have some follow-up questions about your experiences with Mr. Floyd. Before I get into that, I want to just go through a few things with you. You have been interviewed by law enforcement and prosecutors several times in connection with this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
The first interview that you provided was in May. It was on May 31st of 2020 with an agent from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension named Nathan Adams, as well as an FBI agent named Christopher Langert, correct?
Yes.
And you have you had an opportunity to review a transcript of that interview, that first interview?
Yes.
All right. You were also, then you had a meeting on December 14th with the prosecution team in preparation for this case, right?
December 14th.
December 14th. Would
It
you
could
dispute
be.
me if I told you that?
I believe you.
Okay. Then you also had an interview back in June of 2020 with just the FBI agents and some prosecutors from the federal government, right?
Yes.
And then you met again with prosecutors on February 21st of this year, or 25th, excuse me, of this year.
That sounds right.
And then finally on March 31st, which I believe was just yesterday, right? And you understand, again, that at least the meetings with law enforcement, they were recorded, transcribed, and you've had opportunities to review both of those transcripts.
Yes.
And in fact, I think yesterday when you met with prosecutors, you went through the FBI transcript from that meeting back in June.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So I know that you and Mr. Floyd both struggled with opioid addiction, and I just need to ask some kind of follow-up questions on that and time frames, all right? So when you first met Mr. Floyd, you would agree that throughout the course of your relationship, you and Mr. Floyd both had a struggle with opioid addiction.
Yes.
And there would be periods of time where you would both be using, and there would be periods of time where neither one of you would be using, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And there would be periods of time where one or the other may be using, right? Like you may have been
Yes.
using and he wasn't, or vice versa.
Yes.
All right. And you knew at some point Mr. Floyd had gone through some treatment programs, right?
Yes.
And I kind of want to just zero in on the time frame from January of 2020 until his death in May. Would that be okay?
Yes.
And I know that this is difficult, and I'm sorry we have to go through this, but so I want to kind of work backwards in a sense
Okay.
in terms of your statements.
Okay.
Well, let me strike that. You testified that there were periods of time where you would get a prescription for, or Mr. Floyd would get a prescription for opiates legally, meaning through a doctor, right?
Yes.
And you'd go to a doctor, you would get a prescription, and you would use those pills, right?
Yes.
And then there were other times where you would buy other people's prescriptions from them, right?
Yes.
And then there were times when those weren't available, and so you would have to buy different types of pills, right? Unknown sources, so to speak.
Yes.
And are you familiar with Maurice Hall?
Yes.
And was Maurice Hall the person that you and Mr. Floyd bought controlled substances from?
We had.
I'm going to show you a photograph. And just to you, you'll be the only one who can see it. at this time. It's been previously marked as Defense Exhibit 1006.
Okay.
Can you see that photograph, ma'am?
No.
Just to her.
No.
Oh, sorry, I gotta hit this. Can you see that photograph, ma'am?
Yes.
Is that the person you know to be Maurice Hall?
Yes.
And can you just generally describe what he's wearing?
Red hat, red pants, and a black and white shirt.
And that is up in the upper right-hand corner. Would you agree that that has the date of May 25th, 2020?
Yes.
And that's the person that both you and Mr. Floyd had previously purchased controlled substances from?
Yes.
Now, in the January and February time frame, were you and Mr. Floyd clean and free from using opioids?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. In the January and February of 2020 time frame, did you and Mr. Floyd, were you clean and sober? At that?
January and February?
Yes.
We weren't really talking to each other, so I wasn't around him.
Okay, so you kind of were on the break at that point, right? And then you reconnected sometime in March, right?
Yes.
And was there an incident in March that required Mr. Floyd to be hospitalized?
Yes.
And that was, can you describe for the jury what that incident was?
Which date are you speaking
In
of?
March, when he was hospitalized?
There was we went to the hospital a couple times in March.
Okay. He was hospitalized for a more extended period of time in March, right?
Yes.
That's the incident I'm talking
Okay.
about. Okay. I understand he went once because he had hurt his hand, like cut his hand on glass or something. And that was a shorter hospital stay?
Yes.
But then there was an extended hospital stay
Yes.
in March. Can you describe for the jury what led up to that hospital stay?
Yes. Floyd, I went to go pick Floyd up from his house that night. I thought I was taking him to work. He wasn't feeling good. His stomach really hurt. He was doubled over in pain. Just wasn't feeling well, and he said he had to go to the hospital. So I took him straight to the hospital. We went to the ER, and they were checking him out in the ER, and it was getting late, and I had to get home to my son, so I left that Friday night.
You later learned that that was due to an overdose?
Yes.
Object, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Overruled.
You spent several days with him at the hospital, correct?
Yes.
And did you learn what caused that overdose?
No.
At that time frame, did you learn that Mr. Floyd was taking anything other than opioids?
No.
You did not know that he had taken heroin at that time?
No.
Now, then in March of 2020, you got some pills, right? You remember describing that?
Yes.
And can you describe what those pills were like?
How, like, physically?
Physically.
Well, they look different to me than a normal pill. They seem like they were thicker.
Were they uniform in their size?
They weren't.
Did they have markings on them?
Yes, they did.
And you and Mr. Floyd both had those pills?
Yes,
And did you consume some of those pills?
I did.
Did they have the same effect on you as they did as your other types of opioids you had taken in the past?
No.
What was the effect this time? And what was different?
Usually, a opioid to me is like it's a pain reliever. It's something that is, kind of relaxing, takes your pain away. The pill that time, it seemed like it was a really strong stimulant. I couldn't sleep all night. I felt very jittery.
You felt what?
Very jittery.
Okay. And so these were pills that were not bought from someone who you knew to have a valid prescription for Percocets.
No.
Were these pills purchased from Mr. Hall?
No.
So when were these pills before or after Mr. Floyd was hospitalized for his overdose?
I don't remember.
But you described when you picked him up that night, so you must have reconnected because you had had a little bit of a break,
Yes.
right? Reconnected. When you picked him up that night, he was just in incredible pain, doubled over, right?
Yes.
His stomach hurt very bad.
Yes.
Now, I want to focus our attention on your statement that you gave to the FBI. And again, you've had an opportunity to review that transcript in its entirety, right?
Yes.
And you've had an opportunity to answer questions of that the prosecution had of you regarding that statement as late as of yesterday, right? You and I have never met before, right?
Not that I believe.
And so I've not had an opportunity yet to ask you about some of the information in your statement.
No.
When you met with the FBI, you informed FBI agents that
Going to object to the proper form of cross-examination.
Sidebar. We'll wait for him
Thank
to
you.
formulate the question.
Thank you.
Let me back up a little bit. Did you know Mr. Floyd to spend a lot of time with Mr. Maurice Hall?
I wouldn't say a lot of time, but he spent time with him, yes.
Right. And would you agree that that was kind of from time to time that he would spend time with him?
Yes.
And you didn't like that, did you?
Excuse me, I didn't like Maurice very much, no.
Would Mr. Floyd be honest with you when he told you that when he was with him?
I'm going to object to Your Honor's characterization.
False respectfully. That is sustained. You don't have to answer that one.
Yeah.
you knew Mr. Floyd would purchase narcotics from Mr. Reese or Maurice Hall?
I don't know that. I speculated that.
Do you recall the FBI agents asking you, did Mr. Floyd purchase controlled substances from Mr. Maurice Hall?
Yes,
And do you recall saying yes?
I did say yes, but I did not see it with my
I'm
own
gonna object at
eyes.
this point.
How long is it?
Okay. Now, the pills that were purchased in March that you described,
Yeah.
did you know that those were purchased from Mr. Hall?
What?
The pills that you described in March of 2020?
No, I didn't know.
But those are the pills that kept you up, you said, all night, right?
Yes.
Did those pills continue to be around from March through May?
I don't know.
Do you recall the FBI asking whether you were getting those same pills from the same source from March to May?
I don't recall that question.
Would it refresh your recollection to review a transcript?
Yes.
Never.
I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Bates 45212, page 12. Just kind of read this, so you'll hear it down in your head.
From the beginning?
No, just from about here down.
Oh, okay. Honestly, I was in such shock then. I don't even know what I mean by some of the things I said.
There was no question. I'm gonna ask that that be stricken.
That's not who's different. We'll leave it on.
Did ask a question about that
So,
statement before
this-
approaching.
Council, sidebar.
So you've now had an opportunity to review that portion of the transcript, right?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that the FBI agents asked you from March to May if you continued to purchase those pills from the same source? Did they ask you that question?
They
Yes.
did.
And you responded, once in a while when we were desperate. Agreed?
That's what it says, yes. I don't recall saying
I'm going
that.
to object as non-responsive.
Okay.
Overruled. No, I don't.
You don't remember that.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Overruled. The answer will stand.
And Mr. Floyd's overdose, that was at the beginning of March of 2020. He was hospitalized March 6th, agreed?
Yes.
Of 2020. And he was in the hospital for 10 or 11 days, something like that?
No, 5.
5 days. And when you took him to the hospital, Did you notice foam coming from his mouth?
I noticed like some kind of, like, foam building in the corners of his mouth, kind of
Like
dry.
a dry white substance?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sorry.
Now, pardon?
No problem, we'll just walk through.
All right. Now, you were asked a couple of questions in terms of whether that overdose was caused by heroin. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said you didn't know.
I didn't.
Do you remember telling the FBI that the overdose was from heroin?
I was speculating.
Do you recall telling the FBI where or whom the source of that heroin was?
Once again, yes, I do remember that, but I was speculating.
And was that Mr. Hall?
No.
Was that Shawanda Hill?
Yes.
Did you know Mr. Floyd to purchase drugs from Miss Hill as well?
No.
Do you recall being asked whether he purchased drugs from Miss Hill previously?
I don't remember that, no.
May I approach the witness to, would it refresh your recollection to review a copy of your transcript?
Yes.
May I approach?
So this is to refresh your memory, there won't be a question before you at this time? So he'll go back and he'll ask a question once he returns.
Where does it say that he was buying drugs from her? That doesn't say buying.
I'm sorry?
It says getting drugs from her.
I'm gonna grab, I need to grab one previous page. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Page, this again is to refresh your memory, so there's not a question before you that you need to answer yet.
And then that says he was buying drugs from her.
Well, let's start with the Zach refresh.
Yeah, I haven't got it. I'll go back to Floyd. Ms. Ross, does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, but none of that said he was buying drugs from her.
You were asked, do you know who the woman was that he would have gotten that from? And your response was Shawanda Hill,
Yes.
right?
I was speculating at the time. I did not know that.
Understood. And you were asked, you said he liked getting drugs from her, and you said, mm-hmm, correct? That's what you
It
said.
says that in the transcript, yes.
Now, those same pills, you ultimately got some of those same pills from March, or similar pills in May of 2020, correct?
We got pills in May that reminded me of the same feeling. I don't know if they were the same pills. I don't know where they came from.
Right, okay. So you had a second experience with those pills, right? Or a similar feeling to those pills?
I had a similar experience, yes.
Right. And that was approximately a week before Mr. Floyd's passing?
Yes.
And by similar experience, do you recall telling the FBI that when you had that, you felt like you were going to die?
I don't remember saying that, but I did see it in the transcript.
And is that how you felt, like you were going to die?
I don't remember feeling that way, no. I didn't recall even saying that.
You and Floyd, Mr. Floyd, excuse me, I'm assuming like most couples had pet names for each other.
Yes.
And what was his name for you? I mean, what were you saved? Let me strike that. What were you saved in his phone as?
Mama.
Now, approximately a week prior to Mr. Floyd's death, you and Mr. Floyd again purchased pills from Mr. Maurice Hall, correct?
I believe so. I'm not sure.
Do you recall telling the FBI that you bought pills from Mr. Hall 1 week prior to Mr. Floyd's death?
Yes, but I wasn't there. I wasn't there. I didn't see anything happen.
Yesterday, when you met with prosecutors, did you tell them that you were in the car at a hotel
Yes.
when those pills were purchased?
Yes.
And that you were on the phone with Mr. Floyd at that time?
Yes.
And you heard a voice in the background?
Yes.
And that was a voice you recognized to be from Mr. Hall?
I thought so, yeah.
And so between Mr. Floyd's hospitalization through March and the quarantining and all of that, March and April, Mr. Floyd had been clean during that time frame?
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, if you need a
No,
minute.
it's okay.
I'm sorry. I want to just, again, time frame becomes important.
Yes.
After Mr. Floyd was hospitalized in March,
Mm-hmm.
you were quarantining together, spending a lot of time together in March, April, and May, correct?
Yes.
And for the majority of that time, Mr. Floyd was clean, right?
Yes.
And it was your belief that Mr. Floyd started using again about 2 weeks prior to his death, correct?
I noticed a change in his behavior, yes.
That's when you noticed the changes in his behavior. And you described some of those changes in his behavior in that time frame, right?
Yes.
Do you recall telling the FBI that there would be times that he would just be up and bouncing around, and then there would be times that he would be like unintelligible?
I don't recall that, but
Would you disagree if I said that in the transcript? That's in
no,
the
I
transcript.
wouldn't disagree with that.
Were you aware that Mr. Floyd was with Mr. Hall on May 25th of 2020?
Only in the aftermath.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Yes, sir. Hello again, Ms. Ross.
Hi, Mayor.
Just a few follow-up questions for you. And maybe try to go in reverse order, but counsel was asking you about, whether you knew these pills were purchased from Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Most recently in May.
Yes.
Talked to you about the hotel incident. And I just wanted you to clarify for the jury. You're not trying to mislead them or anything. What you're saying is you didn't personally see that sale.
No, I didn't. I just want to say what I saw.
Right. But you think that's probably where those pills came.
Yes.
You don't dispute that.
No, I don't.
Yeah. You just personally didn't see it.
Exactly.
And incidentally, what did he call his mother? What did he refer to her as?
He called her mama too, but it's just different the way he said it. It's kind of hard to describe.
So if you were to say to somebody, "Mama," that could mean his actual mother.
Yes.
Just also a name he called you.
Yes.
You were a mother too, right?
Yeah.
Still are, I guess.
I
I
am,
shouldn't use
always.
past tense. And Mr. Nelson read for you some things you said before, but when he was asking you about the May pills and how they made you feel similar to the March pills.
Yes.
But I wanted you to tell the jury, in your own words today, why you say that they had a similar reaction for you. What was it about it? So in March, you said the pills kept you up all night and were kind of jittery.
Yes.
Is that the same reaction you
Same
had?
effect. It was a stimulant.
And when you took that pill in March, that seemed different.
Yes.
Obviously, you did not die from it.
No.
And did you see yourself, Mr. Floyd, taking one of those types of pills in March?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Yep. So the pills that we were talking about you obtained in March
Yes.
that caused you to feel jittery and were different. Did you
Yes.
also see Mr. Floyd taking that kind of pill?
We did not take them together that time.
Did you think that he had some of them for himself?
Yes.
Obviously, he did not die in March.
No.
And the pill that gave you a similar experience in May,
Mm-hmm.
yes?
Yes.
Did he have some of those pills as well?
Yes.
Did he take some of those pills in May?
Yes.
He did not die before May 25th of 2020, correct?
Yes.
When you saw this change in his behavior prior to his death, in those 2 weeks, what did it lead you to think about, based on the 2.5, 3 years you had been with him, about how much he was, how often he was using during those weeks?
I don't know.
Fair enough. You were asked about your interview with the FBI and asked about statements you made. Did the FBI, as you recall, ever ask you, how did you know those drugs were from Mr. Hall? When you told them that you thought they were from Mr. Hall?
I just told him I thought that.
Yeah. And the pills that we're talking about in May,
Yes.
I can't remember if you told me, did you see Mr. Floyd take any of those pills?
Yes, we took them together that time.
I'm sorry.
We did take them together that time.
And when he took those, obviously he didn't die, right?
No, he did not.
Did you see how they affected him?
He had a lot of energy.
And but he was okay after using them?
Yes, he was playing football, hanging out, eating. Just a normal day.
Incidentally, did he play a lot of basketball?
He played basketball too, but football was his thing.
Okay. That's all I have here.
Anything further? Thank you, Ms. Ross. You are
Thank you.
And if you could make sure you take your
Thank
water
you.
with you?
Yes.
Yeah, if you could take your water, that'd be great. Members of the jury, I think this is a good time for our 20-minute mid-morning break.